But here's Forbes, not Bev Harris. Romney family investment ties to voting machine company that could decide the election, causing concern.
...2012 could be the most unique presidential election in history in at least one respect. How many times in history has one of the candidates for president actually been connected to the company that owns the voting machines? Here's the backstory. Hart Intercivic is an Austin-based voting machine company, and its clients include Hamilton County, Ohio, which administers elections here in Cincinnati. In fact, Hamilton County is only one of 2 counties in the entire state that use Hart Intercivic. The other is Williams County. It's in the northwestern part of the state, a very small county. Hamilton County, though, is very important. Hamilton County, which went to Obama in 2008 and Bush in 2004, is believed that it could be the one that decides the winner of Ohio.
What a surprise. There's already reports of voter fraud with the people that are allowed to vote early. Voting machines in Ohio, North Carolina, and Nevada are switching votes from Romney to Obama. You may recall in the 2000 election, the Diebold president of Diebold electronic voting machines, had a memo that was admitted to be authentic that somebody released publicly, an internal memo, where he said, we're going to deliver the election to George W. Bush. That was the president of Diebold Voting Machines, who has since changed their name. The company is still in business making electronic voting machines, but they had to change their name because the voting machine company got so well known as a fraudster, scam artist company. You might have seen an episode of The Simpsons in 2008 where Homer Simpson goes in to vote. He tries to vote for Barack Obama, but the electronic voting machines register his vote for John McCain. And then Homer makes a statement, this doesn't happen in Springfield, I would expect this in Ohio. Okay, and what that is that's a reference to the 2004 election, when in Ohio all the exit polls showed that the state was going to go for John Kerry, but then the state mysteriously went for George W. Bush. Okay, and so that was a key state for the electoral college.
Doesn't happen in America, maybe Ohio, but not in America.
The winner, and so just mysteriously, a state filled with Diebold electronic voting machines just happened to go for George W. Bush when all the exit polls showed that they were going for John Kerry. Ohio early voters, touchscreen changed from Romney to Obama. It took 3 attempts for machines to correctly record her vote. So, oh my gosh, another quote, broken machine in Ohio. But already here, just about a week, 5 days before the election, voter fraud is already happening. It's hilarious that this Simpsons voter fraud clip got 29 million views. So a lot of people know about the voter fraud. It is what it is. Just keeping you up to date on the latest scams regarding the 2012 election.
And Ohio, more than any other state, will likely decide the presidency. Hart has had voting machines in Hamilton County since 2007. So suffice to say, Hamilton County is really, really important. So how do the voting machines come into play here? The Ohio website Free Press has reported a key investor in Hart is HIG Capital. 7 HIG Capital directors are former employees of Bain Co, the same Bain Company where Mitt Romney was CEO before leaving in 1984 to found Bain Capital. So definitely some connections there. But according to Salon.com, HIG Capital has gone even further, contributing $338,000 to the Romney campaign this year. More importantly, They announced their investment in Hart, the voting machine company, a month after Romney formally entered the presidential race. 4 HIG executives have been identified as Romney bundlers by the independent watchdog group, the Sunlight Foundation. Okay, so clearly HIG Capital are Romney supporters, and they became major investors after Romney announced his bid for president. But even if they wanted to, could Hart Intercivic actually tamper with the voting results? Well, actually, they might be able to. In 2007, when Hart and 2 other voting machine companies began providing services in Ohio, the Secretary of State's office conducted a study called Everest to determine just how trustworthy the machines are. And here's what they found about Hart. Quote, the researchers concluded that virtually every ballot, vote, election result, and audit log is, quote, forgeable and otherwise manipulatable by an attacker with even brief access to the voting systems. And there's a long list of problems with Hart machines, too long for this report. But researchers also found that the Hart voting system violates, they say, a basic isolation tenet of security engineering. Compromise of a single precinct provides materials to compromise any precinct and the election headquarters. They also found that the auditing features were vulnerable to a broad range of attacks that can corrupt or erase logs of election activities.
This is a Diebold AccuVote TS electronic voting machine of the type used in elections in several U.S. states. On the morning of Election Day, the voting machine awaits instructions. The machine appears to be functioning normally, but, unbeknownst to any observer, it contains malicious software that will steal votes. The election has begun. The first voter approaches the machine to cast his vote. He inserts the voter card into the machine, and the machine presents him with a ballot. The machine ejects the voter card, after marking it as used. The machine prints out a paper tape announcing the results. The tape shows that Benedict Arnold won the election, 3 votes to 2. This result is incorrect. Malicious software stole votes from George Washington and gave them to Benedict Arnold. When the election ends, the vote-stealing software can delete itself from the voting machine. No evidence remains that the machine was ever hijacked. No evidence remains that any votes were stolen. As far as anyone can tell, the election was conducted fairly.
So what this means to you, well, first of all, let's be clear. We're not saying that the Romney campaign will cheat or has any plans to cheat on November 6th. But regardless, there is a huge problem here, one that transcends any one candidate. And the answer to that problem is transparency, a written record of every vote cast, a hard copy record, one that can't be changed by hackers or by software companies, one that can be verified and then recounted easily and clearly after the election.
Well, it is complex, and I think what we can certainly say is the good old boys from both parties want the system to be open for business. And you know that because it doesn't matter how many times it's proven, they don't solve anything. The same exact systems that we demonstrated were easily hackable in Hacking Democracy, the film that you mentioned. And I don't know if I would even go so far as to say which party, but I will say, you know, in your lead-in, when you talk about the Romney family having ownership ties to Hart Intercivic, which is now the 2nd biggest voting machine company in the United States, that is unprecedented. And essentially, whoever controls those machines controls the outcome. Well, you know, one of the things that concerns me very much is, as you know, let me just backtrack a second. You watched election returns on election night, and you see this charade where they say, oh, the polls have just closed in Texas, and the result is, you know, they announce it within 60 seconds. Even with electronic voting, let me tell you, the result, not one vote is counted in 60 seconds. The results, even from electronic voting, don't come out for 20 minutes or so at the soonest. So what they're doing is they're saying our exit polls have told us that we're projecting that this winner and they just aren't supposed to announce what their exit polls say. Well, they have now, and by the way, all the news media, which pretends that they're competing for the data, it's such a joke. They actually all use one firm called National Election Pool, NEP, and so they're all using exactly the same numbers when they project. Well, now, NEP, which, bear in mind, is being paid by every major network plus the Associated Press, is claiming it doesn't have enough money to do exit polls in 19 states. So I'm thinking we should all have our stopwatches out and watch how the networks handle this. The polls have just closed in Oklahoma. There are no exit polls. You know what? You're not going to have any votes counted for about 20 minutes, and you're not going to have all the votes counted until about 10 or 11 p.m.
Sure, but expanding on that.
How are they coming up with this? Who's winning?
Well, sure. Let's go back to Iowa, what we saw in the Republican primaries. And Ron Paul, God bless him, I guess he doesn't want to look like a sore loser, so he would never say anything. But even the New York Times had to admit that he'd really won Maine and really won Iowa. I mean, and then and then Karl Rove goes on and goes, there were some guys got lost in some trucks, and nobody knows where they are. Even Karl Rove was laughing about this because they were all tallied at the precinct and then phoned in and posted. There were no trucks and ballots. And then it turned out Republicans bragged days before on radio that they were going to cheat Ron Paul. I mean, could that be their downfall, their out-and-out arrogance?
Well, that's always the downfall of an elite that is taking over power, is they always underestimate the common sense and the brilliance of the everyday man.
Well, what was your take on the stuff we saw in the primaries? I mean,
my gosh. Well, I'll tell you exactly what my take was. And I am nonpartisan. I want to be able to say Obama this and Romney this. But the bottom line is the Romney people, his employees, took over the Iowa caucuses and ran them, same with Nevada. And then we saw chicanery. And what my take was is this in November is going to be brutal because he's not even arm's length. He just, I'm sorry, he just obviously tampered Iowa, Nevada, Maine, and some very squirrely results came out of South Carolina. That came off of the voting machines, actually, where the algorithms just looked like they just didn't make sense. But, if that's the case, and then we find out that ahead of time, in July 2011, his family got involved in ownership at the voting machine company. Let me tell you, there's something different about the way that Hart, which is the company associated with Romney, Hart voting machines, are programmed. In most locations in the United States, they don't program them locally in the county. They don't have their local IT guy do it. They send them directly to the Hart company, and the Hart company sends them back the memory cards and says, here, put this in your voting machine. So if I'm a presidential candidate and I own that company, all I need is a couple of guys, maybe just one, who is a technician in the plant, and he basically is given the memory cards for the strategic counties. Well, it's not democracy. It's not a democratic republic. It's just the government choosing itself. That's what it is. And once the public starts to understand that, hey, if we can't see the counting itself, the original count, not some after-the-fact, theater, if we can't see and authenticate that, we don't have a system where we have sovereignty. We don't have a system where the public is in control. It's not self-government. Yeah, there's a lot of things. Colorado, talking about these Hart voting machines with Ohio, we're in Cincinnati, and that's going to be a problem. I agree. But Colorado is very dominated by these Hart Intercivic voting machines, and there are so many strange things that have come out of Colorado. Let me just mention, the Secretary of State has said, let's not put seals on the voting machines this year. It costs too much. Bear in mind, the seals cost a penny, okay? Why are they not sealing things? And by the way, I started to mention Colorado. They passed a last-minute law that said no one can get any records until 45 days after the election. But we intend to get them anyway. What we need the records for is for litigation and to prove the case, because we have to get the public to the point. We've done a lot of proving over the last 10 years, but it seems each election cycle we get a whole new wave of people who start to understand and get it and take action themselves.
And let's remember, 10 years ago when you come on my show, people are like, Hagel owns the company that 90+% vote for him on in Nebraska? You mean these companies can remote access these? You mean engineers are going public in legislatures and testifying they were hired to engage in fraud?
Right.
And there's been, I mean, it's come out in Ohio there was fraud. I mean, this is really going on. So we've gone from most Americans not knowing it's even happening to, well, I guess it's just fraud.
Well, we are getting to a tipping point. We're getting closer. I can feel it because I was there and you were there back in the day. And back then, we were getting called all kinds of labels. Oh, we were conspiracy theorists and this and that. Well, it's been proven by umpteen universities. There's been, several different cases that have been won in lawsuits now. And it's just a matter of getting this big mammoth behemoth country that we have to the tipping point so that enough people really do understand it. And secondly, that they do not accept it. Because if we start accepting this stuff, it's all over. You mentioned earlier that some of these companies are foreign-owned. One of the huge foreign-owned companies is SOE Software, which is reporting the results, not counting, but reporting the results for 1,400 locations in 26 states. It's massive. So what that means is what comes out of even the voting machine has an opportunity to be changed before it's reported to the public.
And I've seen different breakdowns by universities. The United States has one of the least transparent, rated as one of the worst systems in the world. But Americans don't realize we're now not the laughingstock. People in foreign countries, they know we're a joke.
Oh, yeah. The Carter Center monitors elections in foreign countries, and they announced in 2008 that we don't even qualify for their monitors because we have an election system that is worse than Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's worse than Uganda. It is a joke. And Europe understands this. I mean, there's 3 countries in Europe now that have banned electronic voting. And they're looking at the United States just going, what are you guys doing?
Well, there's a reason we live under so much tyranny, because they know we can't get rid of them by and large. I mean, that's quite a realization that we've been taken over.
So that's one thing. There's about 4 big boys in terms of the voting machine companies. Also understand they're all interrelated in terms of their ownership and the key people, and that in many cases we don't know who owns them because they don't see they have to tell us. But the big ones, there's one called Dominion, which is headquartered out of Canada, which is also associated and licenses its stuff to one called Smartmatic, which is out of Venezuela. And then there's ES&S, which is huge globally. It's all over the world. And there is Hart Intercivic, which is the one that's associated with Romney. And there's Seidel, which is one that's owned by a Barcelona, Spain company. Now, these different companies, and they are interrelated guys in many cases, are really pushing exactly the same concept into many, many countries at once. And the citizens in many countries are starting to figure it out. It's not just here. I'm in contact very often with guys in India, because in India, the government literally built its own voting machines and chooses itself. And they're very aware of that there. In the Philippines, they have this company. It's a joke. It's out of Venezuela, and it licenses stuff from this Dominion company, which also runs the New York voting. And, it's crazy. One election, they had results show up which are out of Colombia in the Philippines. And they're saying, don't worry, trust us, it's okay. So this is, it's a secret, concealed voting system push, and get it into all these different countries and just tell people, don't worry, it's a computer, it's okay. Obviously, whoever controls the computer controls the outcome.
And they still just smile at us and say, just trust us. And then Karl Rove goes on Fox News and makes jokes about Iowa and just make stuff up, and then it turns out there was fraud, and then they have Republican operatives on shows bragging, saying, yeah, Ron Paul's not going to win. Wait and see what happens next week. And then that happens. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, it is in your face now, and one of the things that I think is the next step is to try to get people accustomed to it so that we accept it. And so, the open link in the circle of control is they have to have an illusion that elections are real. and they have to have acceptance of the election system. That's the open link. That we cannot allow to close up by either saying we accept it, we don't need to know what's going on. If it takes 75 years to fix this thing, we can't quit, because this is all the marbles. It literally is all the marbles for self-governance versus tyranny.